Scripture that was meant to hurt you but shouldn't have, part 9. People often cite spare the rod, spoil the child as a Bible verse about the need for spanking children. In my day, my dad beat me with a belt and I turned out better than these entitled millennials. Spare the rod, spoil the child is not a Bible verse. It's a 17th century poem about a couple wants to have an affair and do some 50 Shades of Grey shit in the bedroom. What folks are probably thinking of is Proverbs 13:24, which I'll read from the King James. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him. Now, some folks will argue that the rod mentioned in this verse isn't a rod to beat you with, but it's more like a shepherd's hook used for gentle guiding. And listen, I like that interpretation, but we have to square it with Proverbs 23, verses 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you beat them with a rod, they're not going to die. If you beat them with a rod, you will save their life from Sheol or the grave. It's pretty hard to get around that. Now look, the tagline of my channel is Reclaiming Scripture for Love and Liberation. And I'm going to do a whole video about what that means. But the first step in reclaiming Scripture is just understanding what it actually says or does not say. The Bible does not condemn women to second-place citizens. It does not condemn queer people or their relationships. You have to twist Scripture in order to make it fit into that agenda. But the second step in reclaiming Scripture is to measure its velocity or trajectory, not merely individual points along a line. And it's a flawed use of the Bible to pull one verse out as if it were God's final word on a topic. Yes, Proverbs 23 says, hey, beat your kid, it's not going to kill them. But it's not the last thing that Scripture has to say about parenting. Compare that with Paul's instructions to parents in Ephesians chapter 6, when he says, don't provoke your children to anger. Biblical scholars call this a redemptive movement hermeneutic. It takes the Bible seriously, even notes the places that really grind against our modern sensibilities. And importantly, it doesn't read all verses of Scripture as if they're on one level playing field. The instructions for genocide in Joshua should not be read with the same level of authority as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Yes, Proverbs really promotes beating your children, but that doesn't mean that the Bible does. Because remember, the Bible is a library of records of people's experiences with God and each other, and built into those records are contradictions and retractions and attempts at saying the old thing in new ways or just scrapping the old thing altogether. To read one verse in the Bible as if it's the final statement on a topic is not taking the Bible seriously. To attempt to flatten those contradictions and internal arguments is not taking the Bible seriously. So yes, because you, dear reader, take the Bible seriously, you should feel free to read Proverbs 23, beat your child with a rod, merely as one old fool's attempt at parenting advice in the 5th century BCE, not as a command straight from the Lord's mouth. That's not ignoring Scripture. That's refusing not to make Scripture into something that's not a verse-by-verse encyclopedia of do's and do-nots. To reclaim Scripture for love and liberation is first to pay attention to the best part of that particular passage, the desire to save your child from an early death. Secondly, to mourn the generations who have come before us, whose parents and parents' parents thought that child abuse was the best option. And finally, to creatively discover together ways that we can raise our children, not provoking them to anger, but raising them in love and not with fear.